Welcome back to Succession Stories. I am thrilled to be here with my guest today, not only because he speaks the language that we all so love on Succession Stories, talk about successions, but he's also very much in tune with challenges. Welcome, Jerome Myers. I am so excited to be with you today and learn more about how you are helping entrepreneurs on their journey.
Laurie, it's so great to be with you. It was so good to have you on the Dreamcatchers podcast. And now to be able to come hang out with you on your show is even more exciting for me because I like being on this side of the mic.
It is super fun to flip the mic on a podcaster because I think we have an appreciation for the conversation at a whole other level. And you and I have so much in common when it comes to working with business owners and wanting to help them at this very difficult stage of their journey, which is kind of what I'll call the back half. And right out of the gates, Jerome, I want to ask you, what do you think are some of the biggest challenges facing entrepreneurs as they think about switching gears, transition, retirement, and exit?
Yeah, it's identity. It's unraveling their identity from the business. If you've been working on something for 10 to 30 years, sometimes even 40 years, a lot of times you identify as the thing. And, I never thought I would be using the language I identify as, but I think that's where we are in life at this point. And so most people identify as the founder of XYZ or the owner of XYZ. And that's how they introduce themselves. And sometimes we get really creative on the backside. It's like, oh yeah, I built a company called XYZ and I exited it. And that's the way they start introducing themselves on the backside of an exit. But I don't actually believe that second description is a healthy one. I think it's very akin to the person that is out of college and out in the working world, and all they want to talk about is the glory days of high school. And I think that founders are people who are really special and super successful, and they have more to look forward to. I think their future is ahead of them and not behind them.
There's some pretty scary statistics out there, and I talk about it in my book, and I've certainly shared it on the show. You and I talked about it on your show too, and that it's tough, right? We know it's tough to build the business. We also know it's tough to exit the business. And just from a numbers standpoint, to put it out there, 100% of business owners are going to leave one day, but very few are prepared. And we can probably agree that maybe that's a root cause of some of the unhappiness that happens when people actually do leave. They're not necessarily ending in a place where they feel good about it. Tell me your thoughts about that.
Yeah, I spend a lot of time talking to folks in financial services. And one of their badges of honor, especially the baby boomer generation, is I'm going to die at my desk or I'm going to die in a meeting. And I'm like, guys, if that's what your mark of success is, you've got like completely missed the boat. But yeah, I think there is this. Here's the thing: 100% of business owners exit. And I think there's only three ways out. Some people argue with me from time to time, but I tend to just lump it into one of these three ways, whatever reason that they think that they exited a different way. So you either sell it, you give it away, or you close it. And whether it's you or a designee because you passed away, one of those three things is going to happen. And so I found that the only people that are really happy about the exit, and there's a very small percentage of those, is the ones who sell it. If you close it or give it away, you probably didn't have the liquidity event. And after working for all these years, you don't get your lottery payout. And I think that is the greatest atrocity that we can have as business owners. Because, I mean, both you and I are business owners. We are going to exit one day. And if we don't get a payoff for all of the IP and all of the work that we've done, I think some of that might have been a waste. And, the time that we didn't spend with our families or doing good in the community, I think that sacrifice might have been in vain.
Do you think business owners have the mindset that they are going to sell as a majority? I know you said there's three, there's sort of three ways to exit. Which one's the leading candidate of those three?
I think most close, right? 80% of businesses that are marketed for sale don't sell. So now we're down to 20% that actually sell, and a very small percentage because 75% of business owners that sell regret selling. And so, you start multiplying percentages and you end up with a very small piece of the pie. But I think most businesses close, whether they run out of cash or the founder leaves or they decide to do something else. And then the giving is usually an intergenerational thing. You give it to your kid or you give it to your niece or nephew or whoever. But I think that one is pretty small because most businesses don't survive one generation to the next. So the biggest one for sure, from my perspective, is closing. I mean, you think about all the businesses that fell. I think I read one time that in the first, like 90% of businesses fell in the first 5 years or something crazy like that.
It's a pretty high mortality rate if you think about businesses like people. And we would never stand for that, to have a high mortality rate, whether it's 60%, 70%, 80, it doesn't really matter. It's a high percentage. And it even carries, I've looked at this data, it's from the US Bureau of Labor Statistics. It carries forward all the way to age 10 and age 15. And if imagine, right, if we would never stand for that, if that's the mortality rate of humans, right? But yet it does happen in business, and it is something to admire when companies can transfer from one generation to the next. So if they're having a sale process to the management team, insiders, but many times that right fit buyer is on the outside. You're meeting owners before exit, or when they're thinking about exit, or after? At what point have you had most of your conversations?
The way we've been describing it most recently is there's a 5-year ban where we think we can have the biggest impact on folks. The preference is to start with folks who are maybe 3 years out from a projected sell. These folks are working on their books, they're talking about strategy, and then they're beginning to implement that so that they can get to a place of maximizing the valuation on their exit. Then there's the 2 years after, where if they didn't actually plan for themselves and get themselves ready for exit, maybe they take a year off and then the next year they're trying to spin it up. But those 2 years after is where I find the pain of the founder's exit paradox is most intense. And a lot of times we aren't able to convince founders that they're going to have a problem when they get their payday. Many of them feel like they're just going to figure it out because they've got enough money. And what we found is the people who are work optional on the backside of exit have the biggest struggle because they don't have to go do something for money. And the motivation to start back up the engine and get the car rolling again to make real impact with the time that they have left on the face of the planet, it's not there. The battery's just not charged and there's no gas in the tank.
So we're getting our business ready. We are, and I sing off the same song sheet as you, right? Messaging that we should be working on this before we're exiting. Otherwise it's too late. So I like the time frame that you've put out there, Jerome. 3 years, 5 years, we've got to get the business ready. And at the same parallel track, getting ourselves ready. But I'm reading between the lines here that a lot of owners are kicking the can and they're not working on those aspects that would make themselves feel really good about the exit. We mentioned statistic earlier that comes from the Exit Planning Institute, right? 75% of owners express regret 1 year after the sale. So let's dive into this and pull back some of the layers of the onion. In working with, and I think you call them owners with an exit, or what's your acronym?
Oh, newly exited operators.
Newly exited operators, the NEOs. So the newly exited operators and the people who are going through this, are they experiencing a loss?
Oh, 100%. So we call it a paradox because from the outside looking in, this should be phenomenal. Like you just hit the lottery. You got more money in your bank account than you've ever had. You got more free time than you've ever had. Everything should be great. And it's very difficult for many founders to say, my life is in shambles. All the certainty that I had is gone. I don't have the building to go to every day. Many of the people, when we do workshops, we have people do this exercise where they list out the 5 people that they spend the most time with. And then we ask them how many of those people are related to the workplace. And inevitably 60 to 80% of the people on their top 5 sheet are in the workplace. And if they're not exiting with you, they're being left behind in the entity, which means that relationship is going to change pretty dramatically. And if you're not talking about work, you might not have much to talk about. And so very quickly you go from having 5 people that you spend time with to having 1 or 2. And that becomes a really big shock. And we talk about self-image. So when you identify as the founder or the owner of this, and you have control and you have authority, and then you go to a place of, oh yeah, that's not the title anymore, or that's not my role anymore. Some of the people who were really interested in spending time with you and talking to you, and some of the power that came with that, it vanishes, it evaporates. And so we watch people just roll around in this stuff and try to find their purpose. And they think they might find it in the Caribbean, scuba diving, or backpacking through Europe, or walking the Appalachian Trail, or playing golf, or whatever you want to insert there. And the answer is inside, even though it's hard for us to find it. I think the most efficient way is to have an observer come and do an exploration with you. I call it going in the cave, and helping you pull out those things that you've lived with and may discount or discredit because they've just been a part of you. I liken it to working out. You go to the gym every day and you're making these tweaks and changes because you're doing the work, and maybe you're eating as you should according to nutritionists, and your body's changing, even though you can't really see it because you see it every day. But then you meet somebody who you haven't seen for a couple of months. You're like, oh my gosh, what a dramatic change. Or you look at an old picture and you're like, oh, I can't believe I was walking around looking like that. Or you try to get into something you haven't tried to wear in a while. And it's like, ooh, this feels so much looser than it was, or I can't believe I can like actually zip this up or button it. Those things are the ones that come and kind of show us that uh, something has changed. But when you're thinking about your self-image and how you show up in the world and how you relate to yourself, because you're a part of that change on a daily basis, I think it's really difficult for you to be able to what we call read the label from inside the jar.
So what's the unlock? What's the unlock to get someone to really consider all of these different facets of their identity, their purpose, what they could do or see themselves doing after they leave their status as an owner of the business? Maybe they step back and they become chairman, they're not day-to-day CEO. Maybe
Yeah.
there's still some tether there. I'm not saying it's a full separation, but certainly a big change in that identity.
Yeah, we definitely encourage. So we've identified 8 exits of a founder, and 4 is becoming CEO, 5 is becoming chairman, and to create that separation so you don't go from running 40 to 80 hours a week to 0 hours and you don't know what to do. And then 6 is actually the one that most people talk about, which is a liquidity event. Uh, we believe that the unlock is a 4-step process that we created called finding your next. And the first step in that is what I've been talking about as it relates to self-image, is nourish. And so next stands for nourish, evaluate, explore, and then transcend. But the nourish is something that I think most founders avoid. They don't want to have the conversation about how they did well and what they're really good at and their unique gifts and abilities. They just want to move on to the next thing for most of the founders that we've encountered. And that, I think, is a tragedy, because what happens is you don't understand what you're good for now that you don't have the company to apply those skills and abilities against. Most of the skills that we develop over the course of running the business are transferable to pretty much any other thing. But if you don't know that you actually have that skill, if somebody isn't helping you see that that skill is transferable, then you can get stuck in, I only know how to do one thing. And there's a falsehood that I see founders experience when they're thinking about the fact that I might not be able to do anything else because this is all I'm good at. Like, for me, that is the scariest part of this conversation, because now they've created a prison for themselves based on their past success, instead of using that as a springboard to go to the next level.
Yeah, that makes sense. As you're talking, I was feeling really curious about some stories. If you have some examples of people that you've met along the way who have experienced some of these transformative ideas that you could share?
Yeah, I can think about somebody that's going through it right now. We've been working for the past year, and they just exited a financial services company. She was president of the company, and um, very engrossed and entrenched in the day to day. And they sold to a larger company, and they have roles within a new company, which then gives a little bit more time instead of just exiting to a pure void. Um, and so we've spent a lot of time talking about, okay, so are you just going to do what's comfortable, which is just sit in the new title of the basically the manager of the division that just sold into the company, or are you going to do the thing? The question of, do you really want to be an entrepreneur, or do you want to be in the mothership? And that was that last conversation right before the exit was very uncomfortable. In fact, she left the meeting mad. She was like, I can't believe you would say that I'm just doing what's comfortable, et cetera, et cetera. She has a passion for helping women get opportunities to or get access to investment advice in a way that isn't traditionally done. She has a passion for creating community for those women. And so we've built out a platform for her to do that. And the question is, are you going to go and do that? Are you going to call those people in? And so after she left the call, after they closed, we talked again, and she was like, okay, my first event is scheduled for 2 months from now. And so it was really interesting to have the conversation, but all of the work leading up to that, it could have been very easy for her to just put that on the shelf. The name of it, what the mission is, how they're doing it, who they're looking for. Like we really want to focus on two things when we're working with founders, because we think this is the fastest way to get them moving. And it's the problems they want to eradicate from the face of the planet and who they want to eradicate it for. And if we can get those two dialed in, then I think very quickly the person finds purpose in doing that. They have a mission, and so they can be on purpose, in purpose, and then like it haunts them if they choose not to make action or take steps towards it. And so like that example for me just kind of encapsulates everything, because on the front side, most founders think that they won't have a problem, but as she got closer, she began to see that things were going to change. And then having that thing that she was walking into is like really valuable. And to compare it to other people, because it was a multi-owner exit, uh, there are other people who don't have that. And so their answer is, I'm just going to work for mothership. And if you've been owner for 20 years and now you have a boss, it doesn't work well for very long, especially when they want to do something different than how you would do it. And most people who actually care about the thing aren't willing to just sit back and say, okay, I'm good with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I was reflecting also on our conversation on your show, Dream Catchers. And one of the moments that was pretty cool, I think, as a guest, you said to me, hey, Laurie, I really appreciate your philosophy on working with business owners. That I called it a marathon, not a sprint. And it takes time, right? And everything that you're describing just takes time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm back at you. I think that together, what we're saying for people is to have an intention, make space to create an intention. If you don't have one right now, that's okay, but create space for it. And business readiness is no joke. That absolutely takes time. I just had a call today with a company that is trapped in their C Corp status, where you're getting double taxation upon an exit, and they absolutely can't do anything about it, right? But if they had gotten advice maybe 6-7 years ago, they maybe could have made some changes there. So that's just one small example, and that hits us in our pocketbook. But then there's a lot of things that hit us in our head and hit us in our heart, and we need to make time and space for that. You do that with your process. You do that with coaching. You're on your podcast and you're speaking all over the world, which is super, super exciting and very cool. Um, One of the things that I noticed in some of the on your website and in some of the literature, you talk about this red pill. It's very intriguing. Tell me about the red pill. I'm imagining this is not an overnight success pill.
No, I wish it was because, I was making a joke about Ozempic earlier today. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it's just not going to, the weight's not, it was just going to fall off in this case. Yeah. So I am a huge fan of the 1999 documentary, The Matrix. I said that on one show. It's like, that's not a documentary. I was like, well, it seems pretty relevant and pretty true. But, it was an action film, and I think it forever changed the way that people thought about action films and the way most people thought about corporate America and maybe life in America in general. And so um, the the protagonist gets an opportunity to choose between a red pill and a blue pill, and the red pill is only to offer them the truth. And so the red pill signifies you being willing to live in your truth, for you to go out, make your mark in the world, and really fly the flag of, this is what I'm about, this is what I stand on, these are my morals, these are my values. And either that will attract you or repel you. Specifically for us, though, when we started building out our framework, we call it the model for a centered life. And what the red pill does is it takes the three areas that I think all of our stress can be bundled into: self-image, relationship, and work, and helps people focus on reducing those levels of stress. And once we turn down the levels of stress, we can then focus on health, because our health is most adversely impacted by our stress, because we do activities in order to numb it if we don't reduce it. From there, we then move up to prosperity. And we do it in that order because we've watched so many people chase prosperity at the expense of their health, only to give up all of their prosperity to try to get their health back. And so we don't encourage people to go backwards. We rather you have your health and then grab the prosperity. And then most people think that's the pinnacle of success, when you have prosperity, when you have freedom, your work optional, as some folks will call it. But we think that transcendence is that last level. And so we call it significance. And this is when you're really focusing on how you're going to make the world a better place, how you're going to really change things. I think for some folks, they would say that their business does that. But I think for the vast majority of the world, they figured out how to solve a problem that they could get people to pay them for. And it's not on purpose or in purpose for them. They're just doing it because it pays well. And so, and for some people, it doesn't even pay well. And so we want people to find that mission, right? We want to find that problem that they want to eradicate from the face of the planet, and the group that they want to eradicate it for. And because they have the success of the business exit, and they have their freedom of time, that they can combine those resources with their talents to then go off and make this thing happen. If you spend 20 years solving a specific problem, I imagine you've amassed a network and skills that will allow you to solve a problem that you really don't want anybody else to encounter. And so that's really what the red pill is about. And our whole mission is helping people find their way to actually having a life of significance. And, the way that we really like to measure this is, when you can't when you can't walk anymore, when you're at your place and they're having the celebration of your life, um, will there be more than 6 people fighting to carry your casket? Because I find often when I do that exercise with the 5 people, people say, "Oh, I don't talk to 5 people." And then I say, "Well, you need 6 to carry your casket. What are you going to do?" And they kind of freak out because they're like, maybe I didn't have the impact I thought I wanted.
It's beautiful. It's really beautiful, Jerome. We have spent a good part of the show learning from you, and now I'm going to pivot a little bit and learn more about you. And I wanted to hear the Jerome Myers origin story. How did you find your way into this wonderful world of advisory and coaching?
Yeah, I remember um, sitting at this desk, and there's, for the people who can't see the video, there's a lone wolf above my head. And that's who I was after I left corporate America. I had the great fortune of leading the building of a $20 million division of a Fortune 550 company. I remember on January 13th, I was employee number 2. And by September 30th, I had 175 people on my team. By the end of the year, we had $6 million in profit. And people were like, how did you do it? And I was like, well, we did this and we did that and we did this. And I remember getting a call on December 24th at 4:55, and the guy saying, hey, I made a decision. We're going to lay half the team off. And I was like, I don't know about that. He's like, yeah, well, it's not a debate. It's like, we've been going back and forth about this for a couple of weeks, and I made my decision. Like, this is not a negotiation. I'm telling you what's going to happen. I was like, man, it felt like entrepreneurship. I felt like I was in control, but I wasn't. And it just started to eat at me. And I gave my agency away, Laurie. I told the team that they were making me do it, and I didn't think it was right. And but it's what had to be done. And we put Humpty Dumpty back together again, and we did another $20 million the next year and another 30% profit. And I just didn't feel right. It just didn't feel good. And so I left and started doing real estate because I thought that's what I wanted to do when I was studying engineering in college. But that led me to that moment sitting at this desk and realizing that I was all alone. And so I started searching. I was like, well, what do I miss? When was I most fulfilled? When was I happiest? And it was when people would come into my office when I had the team and say, I don't think we could have done this or accomplished that if you weren't here helping us. And so I'd been working with one coaching client for about 5 years at that point, and he was having a lot of success. And I was like, man, maybe I should do more of that. And so we started growing there, and really, we talked about the 8 X's of a founder earlier. Really spent a lot of time on the first half of that, right? People who were leaving corporate America and becoming entrepreneurs, and then actually creating an enterprise that worked without them. And it wasn't until I ended up at a business conference where I was listening to a guy who was giving a talk about his 7-step plan to have a double unicorn exit. I was having an existential crisis. And I was like, that's interesting. And then he said, but I didn't know it. My wife told me. I was like, this is getting really interesting. And she told me to go pick up application from In-N-Out Burger because I had to get out of the house. And it just kept getting worse and worse. And so when Q&A came up, I asked him, I said, Laurie, I said, man, well, how'd you get out of your crisis? And he said, I'll let you know when I figure it out. And I was like, well, it can't, like, somebody's got to be working on this problem. Somebody, like, there's no way, because exits happen every day. So there's got to be somebody. And I did all the research and I couldn't find anybody that was really focused on it. All of the M&A advisors end their engagement when the transaction happens. As the industry sits today, the only person that might make it through is the financial advisor. And that's if they were patient enough to be around on the front side because they knew a liquidity event might happen one day. Because I think most founders are awful financial planning clients because they put all their money back in the business. And usually I think it's like 80% of the wealth is wrapped up in the business when they get to the place of exiting. And so I did the research and I was like, my experience when I left my role was very similar. I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't know who I was going to help. And I just was empty. And I realized I lost my identity. I lost many of the relationships that I spent time. The work was gone. I was heavier than I'd been. And there was just so many things that went wrong. And I was like, man, I can fix this problem. I finally found what I consider to be my next, right? It was helping founders get ready. And then even like when you go through the certifications around M&A, it is almost as if personal readiness for an exit is lumped in with having a financial plan for your personal life. And I just don't believe that's the right answer. And so we've just been focusing on being the authority on the exit paradox and helping create the resources for founders who are really concerned about what they're going to do next.
That is really, really powerful, Jerome. And I'm sure a lot of people are interested in what you have to say and all the good things you're putting in the world. What's a good way for them to follow up with you and get some of that information?
Yeah, I think the best thing for a founder who's curious about their next is to go to theexitparadox.com/assessment. And if they do that, they'll be able to have access to a assessment that takes about 20 minutes, and it will give them their personality and give them some ideas on things that they would be successful at doing on the backside of their exit. And even if you're not ready to exit now, having that in your back pocket, I think gives people confidence on the fact that they can do something else. You can be successful at more than what you're successful at. And I think that is the biggest thing that holds founders hostages in the businesses that they're in, even if they're no longer passionate about them.
I totally, totally agree. I know you've got many quotes in your arsenal, and I often ask people for their favorite one about entrepreneurship or anything that motivates you. Is there anything that you can share?
Yeah, my favorite quote is your dreams should be real. I think so many folks spend so much time as adults being told to fit in and to be reasonable. And I think that just leads to mediocrity. You had the dream that you dreamed to get you to the place that you are now. And the fact that we stop dreaming because we accomplish or achieve one dream, I think is a atrocity. And we should really spend time dreaming about what could actually happen once we have the liquidity event and the time freedom and all of the talent that we've built up over the years, if we apply that against a problem that we don't want to see anybody else encounter.
We'll just end right there. I think that's a beautiful way to end. Jerome, thank you so much for coming on Succession Stories. I really enjoy our conversations, and I know that we are going to have more of them.
I look forward to it, Laurie. Thank you so much for having me.
And to all of our listeners, thank you so much for being with us. If you enjoyed and learned something today, we trust that you will share this episode with someone else who also might benefit. Also, if you're motivated to help us share the love, leave a rating and review in your favorite podcast player. And of course, you can find us on our YouTube channel, Business Transition Sherpa, for the videos for not only this show, but also our new sister show called The Entrepreneur Gene. Thanks so much for being with us today, and we'll see you next time on Succession Stories.